Ever get that feeling, like history is repeating itself?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's eerie. We see the same patterns, same mistakes cropping up again and again.
It's like we're all stuck in this giant game of civilization, but nobody can quite figure out how to get to the peaceful victory screen.
Well, today we are diving into one of those historical moments where it really does feel like humanity hit the rewind button hard.
Let me guess, we're going back to the Treaty of Versailles.
Bingo! That's right, we're talking about the treaty that was supposed to end all wars, but instead, well...
Paved the road to another.
Exactly.
It's one of history's greatest ironies, isn't it?
It really is. So buckle up, listeners, because today we're unpacking the what-ifs, the might-have-beens, the how on earth did this happen of the Treaty of Versailles.
We're going deep on this one.
Deep indeed. Okay, so picture this. It's 1919, World War I, finally over, 16 million people dead. The world is, understandably, desperate for some last true peace.
And enter stage left, the Treaty of Versailles.
This document, it was supposed to be that peace, signed in the very palace where German emperors once strutted their stuff, no less.
Talk about adding insult to injury, right?
Yeah.
Except the injuries were about to get a whole lot worse for Germany.
Oh, absolutely. But to understand just how badly this peace treaty went off the rails, we've got to meet our players.
Ah, yes. The Big Four. We've got Woodrow Wilson, the American president, striding in with his 14 points. Talk about an idealist. Wilson, he truly believed in this peace without victory idea.
Which I have to say sounds lovely in theory, but...
in reality.
Well, let's just say not everyone at that table was in the mood for peace, let alone peace without victory.
Especially not Georges Clemenceau, the French prime minister, aka the Tiger. Can you imagine facing off against that guy in a negotiation?
I wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley, let alone a peace conference.
He'd experienced German aggression firsthand, and trust me, he was not about to let Germany forget it.
So you've got Wilson with his hopes for a League of Nations and Clemenceau basically wanting to make Germany pay for, well, everything.
It was a recipe for disaster, wasn't it?
And that disaster, my friends, was the Treaty of Versailles.
A treaty so flawed, so heavy-handed, that it practically guaranteed another war.
We'll unpack exactly how it did that right after this break.
Stay with us. So we left off talking about a peace treaty that seemed destined to fail from the start.
Yeah, it's almost poetic in its irony, isn't it? But to really grasp the magnitude of this miscalculation, we need to talk about what happened after the treaty was signed.
Because it wasn't just the treaty's terms, harsh as they were.
It was the way those terms were implemented, or maybe more accurately, weren't.
Ah, yes, the enforcement or lack thereof. You see, Germany was never fully occupied after World War I.
They surrendered before Allied troops could march into Berlin, which meant
that the German people never really experienced the full humiliation of defeat.
they weren't occupied, but they weren't exactly free either. So you have this proud nation reeling from defeat, but not utterly crushed. What happens in that kind of vacuum?
Resentment. It festers. It grows. And it becomes fertile ground for extremism to take root.
Because if your country has been humiliated, your economy's in shambles, and someone comes along promising to restore your national pride, wouldn't you be tempted to listen?
Especially if that someone is a charismatic speaker with a very particular mustache.
Okay, we're not saying the Treaty of Versailles single-handedly caused World War II, but
That certainly didn't help.
no, it did not. So we've got this powder keg of resentment building in Germany. On top of that, they're saddled with crippling war reparations.
We're talking about billions, no trillions, in today's money.
And how are they supposed to repay this astronomical debt?
With a devastated economy and a currency that was rapidly losing value.
It's almost comical, if it weren't so tragic. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of cash.
Hyperinflation, it was rampant. The German mark became practically worthless. People were burning money for fuel because it was cheaper than buying firewood.
It's hard to overstate just how devastating this was to the German people. It's no wonder they were primed for a scapegoat, someone to blame for their misfortune.
And Hitler, well, he was more than happy to provide one. He pointed the finger squarely at the Treaty of Versailles, at the Allies, at anyone he could paint as an enemy of the German people.
It was a powerful and sadly very effective tactic. But it wasn't just about blaming others, was it? It was also about those promises to make Germany strong again.
To avenge the perceived injustices of the past. And a large segment of the German population, well, they ate it up. They were desperate for solution, any solution.
So the seeds of another global conflict are sown. But what about the League of Nations? Wilson's grand idea for international cooperation.
That was supposed to be the one good thing to come out of this whole mess, right?
Except the U.S. didn't even join.
The irony is almost too much to bear. The nation that championed the League of Nations refused to be a part of it.
Talk about a blow to its credibility right out of the gate.
And without the United States, the League was essentially powerless to enforce its decisions.
So it was doomed to fail from the start.
Not necessarily. I mean, it did achieve some notable successes, particularly in the areas of international cooperation and humanitarian aid, but
It ultimately failed in its primary mission, to prevent another world war.
the Treaty of Versailles, it was supposed to be the war to end all wars.
And instead, it became a prelude to an even deadlier conflict. I guess the road to hell is paved with good intentions, huh?
Something like that. But you know what's really striking about the Treaty of Versailles is how it highlights the danger of unintended consequences.
It's like a domino effect, right? One wrong move setting off a chain reaction that nobody could have predicted.
Exactly. And those ripples, they can be felt for generations. Even today, almost a century later, we're still grappling with the legacy of Versailles.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if they had chosen a different path back then? What if they had focused on rebuilding, on reconciliation, rather than punishment?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's impossible to know for sure what might have been, but it's a question worth asking. Because it reminds us that we always have a choice.
A choice between perpetuating the cycle of anger and resentment.
Or breaking free from it.
And that choice, it's not just for diplomats and world leaders. It's something we face every day in our own lives, isn't it?
Absolutely. Every interaction, every conflict, it's an opportunity to choose a different path. To choose understanding over anger, forgiveness over resentment.
To choose peace.
It's a choice that requires courage, empathy, and a willingness to look beyond our own immediate needs and desires.
But those choices, they can make all the difference. They can ripple outwards, just like the Treaty of Versailles, but in a positive way.
Imagine that. A world where peace isn't just an aspiration, but a lived reality.
It's a vision worth striving for, wouldn't you say? And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the echoes of Versailles and the choices we all face in building a more peaceful future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.